I gave people all the stuff they really needed. Social security checks, utility bills, TV guide.
I want a TV guidance counselor. TV guidance counselor. Staying up to watch all night, and everything's gonna be alright with my TV guidance counselor.
Hey everybody, welcome to TV Guidance Counselor. I am Ken Reed, your TV Guidance Counselor, here with the show TV Guidance Counselor, where each and every week since Valentine's Day 2014, somehow, we've welcomed a very interesting person that I find interesting to the show to discuss classic television, their careers, stuff they've worked on, stuff they've watched, usually using an issue of TV Guide magazine from my personal collection as sort of the inspiration for our conversation. However, some weeks we don't use the TV Guide because frankly we don't need it. And this is one of those weeks. I have not one, but two guests who I've wanted to talk to for a really long time. Al Katz and Gil Adler. You may know Al as A.L. Katz, not the Al Katz, the other Al. We talk about that here. But they are a writing team, or were a writing team, and then weren't, and then are again. Again, we talk about it here. Behind us, so many things I love. The stuff I've talked about on the show a lot. Freddy's Nightmares, Tales from the Crypt, Bordello of Blood is one that comes up. And if you're unfamiliar with them, they did a podcast and currently do a podcast, but the first season of the show, How Not to Make a Movie, which you can go to hownotttomakeamovie.com with dashes between each of the words. I also put links in the show description here. Entertainment Weekly named it the best show of 2022, and I agree with them. That show, the first season, is them reconnecting and talking about how awful their experience was on Bordello of Blood and how it sort of drove them apart, and they've since reconnected. And I love these guys. They're old friends with each other, and also when I talked to them, I felt like I knew them forever. We have the same interests, and also these guys just fascinating careers. IMDb them. You will be amazed at the stuff they've worked on. And their podcast is great. They continued to do the podcast after that first season about Bordello of Blood. A lot of fun stuff about favorite TV shows, interviews with actors, comedian. It's great. If you like this show, you will love their show, and I cannot recommend it more highly than I am doing right now. I could try, but I will fail. They are great. If you want to hear other great people on the show, or if you just want to email me and tell you how much you love this episode after you're done, or how much you love their show now that you're a devoted listener, now they've told you about it, you can email me at tvguidancecounselor@gmail.com or at ken@icanread.com. Also at TV Guidance or at Kenneth W. Reed on most of the social media. It's hard to keep up. There's new ones all the time. Some of them are terrible, but I at least stake my name on them, or claim my name. I don't stake my name. That would be a bad idea. Or if you have a couple extra bucks a month and you are so inclined, you can become a patron of the show. As little as $1 a month is a huge help for me making the show. I am a one-man recording and podcasting machine here, putting a lot of time, which I don't mind. I enjoy it. But it helps with some of the stuff there. As little as $1 a month. If you pay $5 and more a month, you get access to all of the PDFs of all of the TV guides I've scanned over the years with various guests. And if there is a TV guide used that week, I post it on the Patreon and you can follow along and make your picks, and people enjoy that. People seem to enjoy that. Also still doing more videos on YouTube. So if you're on my YouTube, it's TV Guidance Counselor is the YouTube. You can subscribe there or let me know what kind of videos you'd like me to see or shows you want me to cover and that kind of stuff. Anyway, enough about me. On to the reason we're all here, to hear this fantastic conversation. So please sit back, relax, and enjoy the men behind How Not to Make a Movie, Al Katz and Gil Adler.
TV is my friend, and it has been always there for me in time of need.
Plural this week, live via satellite, Alan Katz and Gil Adler. How are you guys?
Alan?
I'm fantastic. Gil, how are you?
I'm doing okay, I suspect, now that I figured out how to get onto the show.
I like that you deferred to him. It's good to test the water first and see how everyone else is doing before you commit to something, I find.
The room is good. Carry on.
So we were chit-chatting a little bit before, and you guys have had a podcast together for a couple of years now. But when I look at your filmographies or the body of work you've both done, there wasn't a nexus. There was a lot of different things and sort of different tracks that I say, well, I was wondering like what the connection is of where you guys met. And the answer is Bordello of Blood.
Actually, the answer is a lot earlier than Bordello of Blood. Way earlier than Bordello of Blood.
Yeah, the thing about Bordello of Blood was that we had been partners for a decade. We met in 1985 when I had a friend from high school who'd become an agent at William Morris named Carol Yumkus. And I was living in New York at the time. I was thinking, I'm going to be in theater, man. And she said, you should write a screenplay. And all right, okay, what the hell? So I wrote one, I sent it to her. She said, that's not bad. You should come out and meet and greet people. So in June of 1985, I flew out to LA for a week. Now, to me, LA was the stupidest fucking place on the planet.
You are an East Coaster.
Well, I was, yeah. It was the land of the avocado head. Really, just stupidity upon stupidity. And but everyone was so nice. It was June, and June in New York, it's hot and stinky, and it was lovely in Los Angeles, and it was a lot less crowded back then, and people were really, really nice. And hey, I recommend having significant amounts of smoke blowing up your ass. It's quite pleasurable. And on my third day, my agent took me to a premiere, St. Elmo's Fire. And it was intoxicating, heady stuff. And the next morning, I didn't have any meetings where people were blowing smoke up my ass. And so someone said, you should go for a drive. And so I went through Topanga Canyon. And this is back in 1985. It was not nearly as built up as it is now. It's beautiful. And as I reached the coast where the Santa Monica Mountains plunge into the ocean, by the time I got to PCH, it was done. I was moving to LA. LA seduced me, and I was no longer fuck New York, and I flew back, but before I flew back, one of the very first meetings I had that first week was this guy Gil Adler,
And I had so many meetings that I was out of smoke to blow up his ass. I was just out of smoke. And so I just let it on the line and just said, hey, what are you doing? And what are you doing out here? And go back to New York. You're better off. In fact, I'm thinking of going back to New York, too.
So you're both native New Yorkers originally, right?
I wasn't from New York. I went to school in New York. I grew up in Baltimore.
Okay. John Waters country.
Yeah. But then I went to Vassar and stayed in New York. And yeah, when I met Gil, it was a very funny connection. Sometimes you walk into a room, you get into another person's presence, and you realize you've met a brother. And I don't have a brother. I've never had any brothers, but I had one. And yeah, for a decade, really, we lived in each other's pockets.
And Gil, you grew up in New York and had moved out to LA probably, 10 years before that?
Let's be kind here, will you, please? Not that many years before. But I did grow up in New York. I came from Yonkers, moved into the city, got a job running the New York State Council on the Arts under Kitty Carlisle Hart. Did that for a while and then produced a play in Edinburgh called El Grande de Coca-Cola, brought it into London, big hit, brought it into New York, even a bigger hit. And all of a sudden, I was an off-Broadway producer of the biggest hit in town, and I was 23 or 24. Started a little production company, raised a little bit of money to develop scripts, hired writers who had successes off Broadway and on Broadway to write screenplays, none of which were made or none of which were good enough to be made, really. And found myself hired to do a little movie called Basic Training.
Oh, yeah.
Playboy produced half of it, or financed half of it, and an English company produced the other half of it. And all of a sudden, I'm in California. I have an office in the Playboy building on Sunset Boulevard, and I'm producing a movie.
Is Rhonda Shear in Basic Training?
Rhonda Shear, yes,
Yep.
Indeed.
Yeah. So this was the height of the sort of TNA post-Porky's comedy.
Yeah.
Playboy Channel was starting to branch out to make their own movies.
Yes.
They were sort of making.
It's so funny you mentioned Rhonda Shear. Why do you mention Rhonda Shear?
Why in general out of that movie?
Yeah, of all the people, because I took one of the first things I did when I came to LA. I took an improv class. She was in my class. She was wonderful. I love. She was great.
She's the only name I can remember from that movie. She's memorable for a variety of reasons, but she's very funny in it. And then I was a big fan of USA Up All Night, which she hosted for many years after that.
Funny story about Rhonda, real quickly, is that we're doing the movie. We rented a house in Venice, and she's supposed to be in bed with this captain, I think, in the Army. And, there was some topless nudity, which we discussed, and she knew she had to do it and all that. Come the day we're going to do it, I get a call. I'm the producer of the movie. Come to the set. Rhonda has problems. I go to see Rhonda. She's frightened. She's afraid. I don't want to do nudity. And, saying to someone, but you promised, doesn't really cut the mustard. So I said, what could convince you to do it? I mean, well, I just feel so self-aware of I said, oh, okay, let me see if I can do something that will change things. And I went over to my prop people and I said, get me the following. And then I went into the bathroom there and I put on the following, and I walked onto the set totally nude except for a red pair of panties. And
That's a good color on you.
And I said, Rhonda, I don't understand. What is the problem we're having? Why can't you do the show? Do you want me to replace you? And of course, everyone cracked up. She cracked up. She realized how silly she was being, and she did the scene. That taught me a number of lessons. One is a producer does whatever he has to do to get the performance. But also, truth be told, I kind of like those little red panties.
Well, it's hot out there, you want to relax. So, because then you sort of carved a niche into sort of horror anthology TV. You worked on a number of those shows before Tales from the Crypt, like Freddy's Nightmares and the Perversions of Science, which was a little bit later. And The Hitchhiker was one of the early ones. That was probably around the time you met Alan, right?
Yeah, right after we met and we started writing together on Freddy's Nightmares.
And so for people, I've discussed that show on my show before, but for the listeners, this was, 89 probably. Frank Mancuso Jr. had just done the Friday the 13th series, which was an anthology series, sort of, but it had recurring characters. So Freddy's Nightmares went into first run syndication the same year. They were hour-long episodes that would have two stories with a connection in the middle somehow, which I imagine they probably weren't written that way, but were sort of configured that way.
Oh no!
It was a Rubik's cube that had to be. Every episode was.
It was a minor character from the first one would be the protagonist of the second one, right?
This was all based on the deal that Scott Stone, a lovely person and a great producer, but he had no idea. He came from reality. He had no idea about dramatic TV, and so you could put a Rubik's cube together. It's not my problem. So he made this remarkable deal about how they were going to be 2-hour movies in Europe, 1 hours and 4 half hours, and each had to work. So each half hour had to work as a half hour, but as a successful part of an hour, and the hour had to work as a successful part of a 2 hour.
Right.
And that was the mandate. And so as we were writing them, we were constantly looking at each other and talking to each other about how does this become a 1 hour? How does it become a 2 hour? And how does it work independently as a half hour?
Which is I've never seen a show do that before or since, probably for good reason.
There's a reason.
But that weird modular, like you have to plant a seed in the first half hour for the second half hour. Yeah. But if it doesn't grow, the person doesn't have to be like it won't bother people. But it's like a boat. Yeah, it's stuck out.
It's a terrible concept.
And yet I just had a revelation. You know what? It's not that far off from streaming a streaming series where you really have to know everything before you start.
True.
And in essence, we were ahead of the curve yet again.
And I think the first one you did was the first season was Freddy's Tricks or Treats with Mariska Hargitay was in that. I think it was one of the first things she did.
Oh, wait.
Because the show had a huge amount of press. The first episode, I believe Tobe Hooper directed, and ended up being basically a prequel to the movies where it was directly tied to Freddy Krueger. It was like the trial of Freddy Krueger. Yeah. But then after that, people were like, well, where's Freddy Krueger? Because he was just hosting after that, which is probably very difficult as a writer. You're like, how come he gets to do the one with the actual character in it? Was there like an edict like, how many times he shows up or like what you can and can't do with this character?
Well, the idea was not to use him a lot for a number of reasons. One, you didn't want to use up the character and you didn't want to have him be doing the same thing over and over. And secondly, because of money, because he was being paid a lot of money and they didn't want to pay him a lot of money. And each time we used him, he got more money. So it was on all levels that we wouldn't use him a lot.
So there was this resurgence of anthology shows in the mid 80s. We got the new Twilight Zone, Steven Spielberg, of course, did Amazing Stories, Ray Bradbury Theater, The Hitchhiker, the new Alfred Hitchcock Presents. And this was unusual. I think there's a lot of parallels between the 50s and the 80s in many ways, but this being one of them as well. And a lot of people I talked to, this was their sort of in, because you didn't, if I remember, you didn't necessarily have to be union to work on these, or they hired a couple people every season or something to kind of get in for these anthology series. I may be misremembering that.
Well, this was a non-union show.
Okay, so that's what.
I mean, the budget we had, was so little. I mean, I think they spend more today on craft service than we had for the hour. We would shoot the hour in 5 days, which means you're shooting 10 pages a day. And on day 6, the next episode started. There was no like a day or two for writing or rewriting. The next day, bang, the next one went on, and we did 22 hours straight in the season. So it was rigorous. I mean, it was rigorous in the writing. It was rigorous in the producing. Alan and I, you can understand why we would spend so much time together, because we were constantly trying to figure out and stay ahead of ourselves.
And were you guys fans of horror stuff before this? Because you guys are both clearly comedy fans, and have an affinity and an aptitude for that sort of writing, I suspect. So horror doesn't seem like it would have been the first thing you jumped to.
See, we should have talked to him before. We would have been so much better off. You're right. We're both comedy guys, coming out of comedy. Always thought I'd wind up in comedy. And I tell people I made a left, I should have made a right, and here I was in the heart of comedy, of horror. But that's sort of what in those days, people were more interested in financing and aiding and abetting that kind of a show than a comedy show. So the path of least resistance was to go into that. For me, was to go into that area.
I've talked about it on the show before for the listeners. So if people at home are playing TV Guidance Counselor Bingo, get your dauber out, because this is going to be a square. But for comedy writing, I always recommend to people Stephen King's Danse Macabre, which is a book about the structure of horror fiction. It's his non-fiction book about horror fiction, because it's the exact same structure, different punchline. And for whatever reason, it makes it's easier to understand that, like shock humor, which is throwing the cat at somebody, building character, that sort of stuff. So it's not that structurally isn't that different. If you could do one, you could usually do the other, but it's just not necessarily what you naturally gravitate towards.
Yeah, we just did an episode on our podcast where we talked about favorite movies and favorite television, and one of my favorites was always Groucho Marx. Whatever he did, television, movies, whatever. And my whole background and early career had to deal with and do around what could I do that's similar, or how can I get into the place where Groucho Marx was in any way, shape, or form? And yet I found myself, thrown into a whole different arena, which we made sort of comedic and fun-loving because of what we wanted to do.
Because when you mentioned Kitty Carlisle, is that like, what's my line, Kitty Carlisle?
Yes, it is.
Okay, so that's, again, for you both are New Yorkers, you grew up watching TV, or you were going to college there, but an East Coaster, more or less. New York was the TV place until the 60s, really. It was movies in LA, New York was TV. But New York also had that sort of sophisticated air of those game shows with people like Kitty Carlisle. You'd have like Gore Vidal on a game show. It was, and like Groucho Marx, who was sort of people who are very quick, off the cuff. The fact that someone writes anything doesn't occur to you because it just seems very natural and game showy.
The English still do those kinds of shows where it's just repartee. It's really repartee and keeping score,
which is hard to do.
Don't forget some of our biggest directors, from John Frankenheimer to Dick Donner to Billy Friedkin. They all started out in New York doing Playhouse 90 and doing all of these shows for television.
Yeah, it's kind of amazing how those things ended up being together with that thing. So you didn't go that far from Groucho Marx working with Kitty Carlisle, but then you're out in LA, you're working on these anthology series, and like most things in LA, if you do one thing well, people who have money don't think you can do anything else besides that one thing, and so you start getting hired to do that thing. Is that accurate?
True enough.
Okay. So you do a couple more shows and then Tales from the Crypt, which was a big deal anthology show, though. Like the names behind that made that sort of a upper echelon, right?
Yes. Tales changed TV in significant ways because it changed HBO. And HBO ended up changing the world of television. And the way that it changed HBO, prior to Tales from the Crypt, they had two, it was movies. They did movies and occasional events.
First and 10 was the show, which didn't do much,
Yeah, and Brian Ben show, but they were both situation comedies with tits and language.
Right. What can we do that you can't do on network? Shove it in there.
Yeah, but they were conventional TV shows. Otherwise, there was nothing big about them. And then our executive producers approached HBO with this idea, and really it was to do each episode was to be a little movie, a feature film done by feature people. You know, these days there's no line between film and the film world and the TV world. They go back and forth easily, but back then these worlds did not mingle at all. If yes, there was the Tom Hanks, the Robin Williams, who went from TV into film. If you were heading from film into TV, that was not a good thing. No. That was bad. Well, suddenly you had these major feature guys doing a TV show that they wanted to, it couldn't just be a TV show. The first 3 episodes were Bob Zemeckis', Dick Donner's, and Walter Hill. 3 amazing episodes. They, at the cast and crew screening, I think some of the press were there, and they're rolling them, and in between episodes, apparently this actually happened. 2 of the crew in one row, one guy says, "Wow, this is great TV," and the other guy says, "It's not TV, it's HBO." The HBO execs in the row ahead turn to look back, having just heard HBO's slogan, but not just its slogan, its descriptor.
Yes.
And that really, we were the first time when suddenly a weekly event, it wasn't TV anymore. We were now going to, and again, this was a subscription model. We were not ad-based. We needed subscribers. We needed people who were going to put their money on the table to watch our TV show.
And it was the big names behind that show. This was the first generation of people that grew up watching TV who were making TV. So
yes.
It wasn't we're inventing it as we go. It was kind of like, what's the coolest thing we could do that we would have wanted to watch when we were a kid, kind of. Mm-hmm. And so that's another reason this got to be sort of, they're in a candy store.
You know, when we got, one of the real thrills was working with Bob Zemeckis. We wrote the script for his episode, Yellow. And that was an amazing experience. In our first season, we really went from really into the deep end of the pool. That was supposed to be the last season of the show. Season 3, the season we went aboard, was supposed to be the end of Tales from the Crypt. The partners owed HBO money, and they didn't, it was coming apart at the seams. And Gil was really hired because Gil is an extraordinary producer, and he's great with the money because he understands if you have $1 to make the show, do not spend $1. Better yet, if you can make for 99 cents, make it look like $1.
Difficult concept to understand in Hollywood.
But it was a relatively cheap show, but it didn't look like Monsters or Tales from the Dark Side. They weren't all bottle episodes. It wasn't, it wasn't Night Gallery.
It's in the writing.
Yeah.
It's always in the writing, and so you have to solve the problems here first. And you can't hand people a script that they cannot possibly produce for the limited budget that you have.
And the other thing that I think we did differently was when we were confronted with a problem, after we had written the script and we boarded it and we budgeted it and we hired everybody and brought in these fancy directors, and on such and such a day we realized there's a problem because they're too slow, they're not fast enough, whatever reason, the actor can't remember. It doesn't really matter, but whatever it is, you've got to fix it. And so, as opposed to what happened in the past, which was the producer yelling at the director saying, well, I'm closing you down at 9 o'clock tonight and you've got 6 hours and you better fix it, and walking out in a huff. We never did that. We would look at them and say, well, what's the problem? What do we do? And then we would rewrite it or fix it.
Yeah, you're putting on the red panties.
Tobe directed a show of ours.
Yeah.
Tobe directed a show that we wrote that Whoopi Goldberg and James Remar and Vanity were in.
The voodoo one.
Yeah, and Tobe came up to us at lunch and he said, I don't know what to tell you. I'm screwed. I've got 9 shots left and I can't make 9 shots in 6 hours. And I don't know about. And we said, calm down. Where exactly are you? And we said, okay, this is how you're going to finish the scene. Don't turn the camera around. You're only going to shoot in this one direction. We're going to go upstairs and we're going to come up with something, and we're going to come down in a half hour and say to you, this is how we want to do it. And if you like it, that's what we'll do. If you don't like it, I'm not going to argue with you. Alan and I are going to go back upstairs and we're going to come up with another concept. But we don't have money to go late. So it's not a question of, us wanting to or not wanting to. We just can't. And so that's what we would do. And so, sometimes it's a win-win situation. We went upstairs, we came up with this concept of fixing something, and we came downstairs and said, Tobe, where are you now? And he said, I just owe one close-up on the girl. I have to turn around for that. I said, okay, you can get that. How long will that take? And the DP said 10 minutes. I said, for lighting. I said, great, so do it. However, after that, we're supposed to go into this other set that we built and we painted and we decorated and we lit.
Lovely set.
We're not
Lovely
going into
set.
that set. And I'm not mad. I'm okay. I'll use it on another episode. But we're staying in this room for the rest of the day. And he said, but Gil, where are we going to hide the pearl? The whole purpose of going into the other room was to hide the pearl. I said, I know.
But it was to find the pearl.
Yeah.
Find the
Which
pearl.
is not a
It was
euphemism,
where-
by the way.
Right.
It was where we suddenly decided to hide it, that it had never occurred to us to hide it before.
So he said, okay, I'll be quiet, just tell me. So I said, okay, what he did is he swallowed the pearl. And on insert day, which doesn't affect your time or your money for your episode, I see it, but you can do it any way you like. I see it as a slow push in. Camera slowly pushes in on a cadaver. A hand comes into frame with a knife, squishy, squishy, squishy along the body. A hand goes into the body cavity and pulls the pearl to camera. Now, if you like that, do it. If you don't like it, well, Alan and I are going to come up with something else. And so I said, but just give it a minute. Just digest it for a second. And you could see Toby's eyes going racing back and forth in his head from side to side. And finally he goes, that's better. That's better storytelling. And
Then we added the additional twist that he was loaded with schistosomes. He had worms.
Yes.
And so there was the possibility you could catch the worms from putting your hands inside his guts to get the goddamn pearl.
Is it worth it? Will not. And then they made the show Fear Factor based on that one thing.
There you go.
And I said to him, we worked it out. We can do it in 9 shots. You can use those shots or not. You can throw them out and use your own shots. You can use some of them. I don't care. I have no ego about this, but this is a way of getting us out of the day. And that's how we would get out of the day. And we found that we would do this whenever we needed to do this with whoever the director was. Whether they were huge A-list directors or neophyte guys or gals. And we would just, that's how we ran the show. But because there was no ego involved, and it was really about how do we make our show the best we can make it, but affordable, nobody really had a problem with us or with doing it.
Because sometimes you need rules and restrictions and constraints to innovate. And in my old man's soapbox, one of the things I complain about now is, you were shooting that show on 35 millimeter. That's expensive. You got full crews, like a movie size crew. It's expensive. So you gotta, to your point, you gotta, measure twice, cut once. Whereas now you shoot forever on an SD card. It doesn't matter. You could CG whatever you wanted. Your first draft gets on the screen basically, but that doesn't mean that's the best thing.
True enough. I mean, we had a situation where we made a little picture years later, and Paul Hirsch, who won the Academy Award for the original Star Wars movie, and cut all of Brian DePalma's movies, that's where we first met. And I was making a little movie, and Paul called me and he said, who's your editor? And I said, I don't know yet. We haven't hired anybody yet. And there was silence on the phone. And I said, you're not thinking you, are you? I would never come to you. It's a little tiny movie. He said, why not? I wouldn't mind doing it. I said, you're kidding me. I said, in that case, you're hired. He said, but I have one stipulation. I want to cut film. I said, I have one stipulation. You can't cut film.
Yeah.
Nobody cuts film any longer. I said, the best I can do is I'll let you wear white gloves.
That's a pretty good stipulation, though.
Yeah, and that was it. And that's how, and Paul cut the movie.
What movie was that?
There was the one Brandon Routh was in. We met in New Orleans.
Oh, Dylan Dog.
Dylan Dog.
Yeah, I loved that movie. That was because Delamore was the movie previously that Michael Suavoy did with another character from that comic book that looked like Dylan Dog. But I'm a big fan of that series. But I really liked that movie. The tone of that is very Tales from the Crypt.
Yeah, it is, and intentionally so. I mean, we really thought we had two wonderful characters. We certainly knew we had two wonderful actors with Brandon Routh and Sam Huntington. He was terrific. I mean, the two of them had great chemistry, and I loved those two characters. In fact, I thought, gee, maybe if we don't continue on with other Dylan Dog movies, maybe I can find something and use these two guys as two new characters, because they played off each other so well, and there was such great chemistry.
And that is a movie that probably would have made a great streaming series other than a standalone movie. Like, it has the tone of that sort of thing. And, was Home Movies the first movie you produced?
Home Movies was the first movie I produced, yeah.
Okay, so you start in movies, you go into the anthology stuff, and then you end up back in movies, which brings us to Bordello of Blood, where Tales from the Crypt, I think around 95, decided, to your point, Alan, the series was probably on its last legs. Let's make this into a movie anthology.
Oh, no. It was that was not the trajectory at all.
Okay.
After in the middle of the third season, suddenly HBO saw that we were attracting talent. We were back to the original mandate. When Gil and I went aboard, it was supposed to be the end of Tales from the Crypt, and something else happened.
You did too good a job.
Well, first of all, we made up the $1 million, but they were the deficit that the partner said they would never pay HBO, and part of our job was to make up that deficit in those 10 episodes, which we did.
We did. And plus, we also brought really great talent to it. We reinvigorated the core concept of the show, on the one hand, by going back to really just I grew up a huge fan of the EC Comics, of Bill Gaines's whole universe. I loved it. The original Mad magazine. Yeah, I loved every bit of that. So this was in my bones. It was in my marrow to do this. This was, So we really wanted to be making this show the way that Bill Gaines imagined it, really take it back to its core. But more important than that, it was really the most important thing that we did. And I think it's why they ordered more seasons. We reimagined the Cryptkeeper. At that point, the Cryptkeeper, you had a great puppet that Kevin Yeager did, a great voice in John Kassir, but no one had considered the Cryptkeeper from the point of view as a character. They were just, when they got to that part, they'd just write whatever they needed the Cryptkeeper to say, and no one really thought about, but who is he? And one of the reason I got hired was I said to Barry Josephson when I got a chance to meet with the folks at Silver Pictures alongside Gil, my question was, what does the Cryptkeeper do when at the end of the day he punches the time clock, as we all do, and he goes home to his real crypt? Who is he then? What does he do? Who are his friends? What are his hobbies? What are his likes, his dislikes? What's his world like? And they were very happy to let us do that. And it was because we reinvented. No, not reinvented. We filled the Cryptkeeper with a life he did not have up to that point.
He starts wearing other costumes. Like, is that the season Schwarzenegger directed an episode? Was that season 3? Or
no, that was second season.
That was second season. But you're getting more interaction. You're getting more.
Yeah,
he was more accessible. We just made him more accessible to the audience. We didn't dress him in a dark shroud and dark lighting. We made him a chiropractor. We made him whatever we could think of, and a dentist, and gave him some funny stuff to say, which was also kind of horrific as well.
But an interior life, what was the most important part of it, so that he had a reference point, and he had an attitude, and he had a point of view. And so when the final episode of season 3, Bob Z's episode Yellow, was supposed to be the final episode, it wasn't. That was supposed to be a celebration of the fact that they were going to order more seasons, which they did.
And to answer your question, Universal, who owned the film rights, then came over and said, listen, this is a big show. It's continuing on. How would you guys like to do, 2 or 3 movies? As
ride-alongs, not as in place of this. We were going to have a TV version and a feature version. This is really, when they ordered the first, the mandate was 3 features, each of them completely different. Mm-hmm. And great. Gil was supposed to direct the first one, but the partners...
Ernest Dickinson did, right? That was Demon Knight?
Well, yeah, there was... Because, the partners wanted a monster movie. They wanted to do Demon Knight, and Gil did not want to direct a monster movie. We wanted to... Because for us, this was a project that was going to... Our goal was to get out of horror.
Right.
And, that's not what the partners wanted to do their first movie, so...
We found a script that we liked and that Universal and the partners liked, and called Dead Easy. And we went to New Orleans, and we were casting, and we were looking at locations, and we were hiring, and we were on and on and on, spending money.
It was a psychological thriller in the way of Nicholas Roeg's Don't Look Now. Mm-hmm. It was taking place in New Orleans. A wonderful villain. It was a great franchise kind of villain. But 3 weeks from our start date, we were going to start principal photography. Universal pulled the plug on Dead Easy, said, no, come home. You're going to do this other movie called Bordello of Blood instead. And that was for a reason that had nothing to do with us.
Yeah, but they said, you're still shooting in 3 weeks, and you guys need to rewrite the script first.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Which we did.
Yes, and this was simply because Universal had bought this script for $500,000 just to make Bob Zemeckis happy on his deal to stay at Universal. It had nothing to do with us. But they bought a student script for $500,000, the first script that Bob Gale and Bob Z ever wrote together at USC, called Bordello of Blood. And that was just to make Bob happy. It had nothing to do with us. But Universal didn't want to eat $500,000, and so they suddenly sprung. Well, hey, you guys, you're going to do this movie instead of that movie. And yeah, your start date, because your release date's exactly the same. That hasn't changed. So we had 3 weeks to rewrite a student script that our boss wrote.
Right, in the 70s.
Yes. Yeah. And yes.
And you might ask, well, why didn't you just walk away from the movie? And you would have been totally correct in asking that question. And I wish I would have known you to ask the question then. But, when you're given an opportunity to make a movie, you don't really just want to walk away from it. I had already walked away from the first one because it wasn't the kind of movie I wanted to make. So we really felt we can't do that again without losing the opportunity altogether. And so we said, okay, we'll do it.
Was the cast attached already? I imagine if you shoot in 3 weeks, it's probably already cast, right? No.
There was nothing. We went from 0 to 60.
Yeah.
In the 3 weeks, we had to rewrite the script, really, because it was a student movie.
We had all other people that we wanted to cast, and then the studio got involved, and they wanted other people, and Joel got involved.
Joel decided he was going to cast our 3 leads. For the lead, we wanted Danny Baldwin, but Joel had, for some reason, he wanted Dennis Miller, which didn't make any sense to us because that was not our audience.
Never been in a movie before.
He didn't want to be in our movie either, and I think he said. Well, yes, yes. Emotionally, he is not in the movie. Yeah. I think he said, "Well, if you pay me $1 million," figuring we would not possibly do that. But Joel, for some reason, said yes. Now, that was our budget was $13 million. We didn't have $1 million in the budget for an actor we didn't want. So we went to Universal for breakage. They said, "We don't want him either. He's not that audience," and so we took that out of our budget. the difference between the $500,000 and the $1 million. So it was $500,000 came out of, well, where was all of our money? Special effects makeup.
Right.
That we took it off. We took it out of there to pay Dennis, who did not want to be in our movie, even after we paid even when we were paying him $1 million. We kind of understand. We wanted an actress named Bridget Wilson for the female lead. Joel wanted Erica Oleniak. I can't fault him for thinking that way. We didn't know that Erica suddenly didn't want to be that kind of actress anymore.
Yeah.
After being hired to do Bordello on a movie called Bordello.
Right. She's a playmate, had worked with Spielberg on E.T., but had just come off Baywatch.
What was her big movie entrance was on a movie called Under Siege with Seagal, where she comes out of a cake. She's beautiful. She's utterly topless. It's a great entrance. But hey, look, we all make career choices. You got hired based on this career choice. Now now that we hired you, you don't want to be on that career path.
So you got stuck with Angie Everhart.
Well, now Angie was a whole other situation because at the time we wanted to hire Robin Givens.
She'd be amazing.
And we were told Robin was a difficult personality, but we worked for Joel Silver.
Yeah,
difficult personalities are nothing to us. So this was not a problem. But Joel was making Assassins at that time, and they were shooting it in Seattle with Antonio Banderas and Sly Stallone, who at the time was engaged to a lovely supermodel named Angie Everhart. And hearing that after we stopped making our movie in Vancouver, and suddenly the reason that we went to Vancouver to make Bordello of Blood is because Joel was always at war with the IA, the union that represented our crew. And sometimes Joel was up and sometimes the union was up. And at that, there was a point where we had done a movie, a TV movie for Fox, and the IA struck us. They shut our set down. And so Joel was on the warpath after that, and every chance he could fuck you to the IA.
What movie was that?
It was for Fox.
Weird World.
Weird World.
Okay, I don't know that one.
Weird World, yeah. And so rather than shoot our horror movie with our crew in LA, he took it to the nearest place where they also make movies, Vancouver, which happened to be just across the border from Seattle, where he was making Assassins. And apparently one day on the set, Stallone approaches Joel and says, "Hey, Joey, we make a movie in Vancouver. You're my girlfriend Angie putting a movie. That was exactly what he really had in mind. We were horrified at, the first thing we did was we called our friend Billy Friedkin, who had worked with her on a movie called Jade. And we called Billy and we said, "Billy, Angie going to be the villain in our horror movie. What do you think?" He said, "She's a lovely person."
He goes, "Why don't you get Caruso there too and just reunite the whole thing?"
No, he stopped with "she's a lovely person." That was it. That told us everything.
So, we went to Joel Silver. We said, Joel, Billy Friedkin, the guy who made The Exorcist, said, "Don't make this mistake in your horror movie." What more do you want in terms of advice? Right. But that was, so no. Then we said, all right, we had her do a screen test. We figured Stallone would never let the woman he loved do this to herself. And look, Angie's
beautiful,
a lovely person. She's very talented.
Great on camera too.
But this was not a fair ask. The villain is the most important character in a horror movie. It was an unfair ask on our part to say, "Hey, be the villain in a horror movie." It was absolutely a terrible ask. But again, we were not casting her for any of the right reasons. Everything was for the wrong reason.
That character carries that movie. That character has to be enticing.
In the first movie, what is Demon Knight without Billy Zane?
Charming, evil, engaging.
Let's say Joel had it in his mind, Charlie Fleischer has to be the Billy Zane part.
No. Roger Rabbit's not going to be Billy Zane.
Right. That's kind of what he would have done to us. He would have had "Hey guys, I'm out here being crazy. I'm going to kill you all." I don't think it would have worked. Billy Zane is menacing. Well, we didn't realize as we were finally forced to hire Angie that this was about something else. The first couple of weeks she would go down to Seattle on the weekends. And because Dennis had come aboard and was improvising all his dialogue.
I was going to say that. I don't think he said a single word you wrote, did he? That's my impression of the movie.
To be fair to Dennis, when he arrived on the first day that he was there, we were already shooting, and we handed him our hastily revised student script. The character is a small town detective. Now, let's be honest. How much business can a detective do in a small town?
Is that a thing?
This is the problem. He is not a thing. And so you start off with a character that cannot exist. How do you create an inner life? Well, even because to us, Tales from the Crypt, it's funny, it's scary. Making this character funny was hard because a generic character can only make generic jokes. And so I knew as I handed Dennis Miller, a world-known comedian, a script that it was not written for him. It was not terribly funny. And he opened the script. He pointed to his first line of dialogue. He said, I can't say that. I'm not going to say that. And he closed the script. He said, Katzy, here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to improvise all my dialogue. Yeah, I'll clear it with you first just to make sure it's okay. But I'm going to just improvise everything. And I was in no position to say, no, Dennis, you must stick to this script like it's fucking Hamlet,
Earn your $1 million,
dude.
Miller.
I could not say that, so all I could say was, okay, Dennis.
So you can see why over the course of that year of making that movie, the two of us aged substantially.
Yes.
But more to the point, our relationship, we were supposed to be making a different movie.
Right.
We were supposed to be making the movie that was going to take our careers from where we were, which was a great place, doing Tales from the Crypt. Wow, it was awesome. And we were being treated really well. ABC Productions gave us a blind pilot commitment that we frankly wasted. My fault.
Did you do a pilot? Did you do the pilot?
We did. Yeah, we were known for doing a horror show, and we tried to do a romantic comedy.
Which is a horror show of a different kind for some people.
Well,
It was for us, too.
it was for us. Silly, stupid. But, we were poised to go to the next level, and suddenly doing Bordello of Blood was exactly the opposite. We went from making a movie we were looking forward to make. Dead Easy would have had its own creative challenges, to be sure, but it was a movie we were absolutely in love with the idea of making it. We were invested in that movie every which way.
And we had some great images that we really played with that was both tingling and kind of funny in various ways during the course of the arc of that main character. So we were really very disappointed that we never made that movie.
Did that script end up getting made? Didn't they do like a third? It was supposed to be a Tales from the Crypt movie, but isn't. I think The Frighteners was written as a Tales from the Crypt movie, but didn't end up being one. But I think one came out, some voodoo movie with.
They stuck Tales from the Crypt, the label to it.
Okay.
To fulfill that 3-picture deal obligation.
No, Dead Easy never got made.
Yeah, I don't know. And no one can find the author. People have been looking for the author of the original script till Tuesday, and he seems to have vanished into the ether. And so it's going to be one of those
lost movies.
Projects that never gets made.
So you guys kind of break up after that movie, right? And that movie was... Demon Knight did very well. It got good critical. Critics liked it. It was a surprise, kind of a surprise hit, and I enjoyed Bordello of Blood. I will admit, I was kind of the target audience for Bordello of Blood. However, I recognized all of the issues we've just discussed as I was watching it. Chris Sarandon seems to be in a totally different movie.
Oh, at least he's just there being a professional. Aubrey Morris was great to work with.
Corey Feldman.
Corey Feldman was
great.
Wonderful. Terrific. Yeah, very professional. The problem was we were making a movie that we did not want to make, that really nobody making the movie wanted to make. And so really every creative decision feels like you're crushing another little piece of your own soul. And lo and behold, that's exactly what happened. In the end, they held us past our original, the next Halloween's release date, and they ended up dropping us in the August doldrums. while we were cutting the movie, we had one more season of Tales from the Crypt to do. And because Joel was still going to the IA, there was an interesting idea launch, do the last season of Crypt in London. And so we did. But by then, I think the series, yes, as you said, that's when we began to run out of steam. We had used up all the good comics. Look, it's a formula.
Yeah.
It's basically there are 2 or 3 variations on the theme. We had done them all to death. HBO was looking to do another show. This was the last season of Crypt. They were going to do a sci-fi show. And so we were consumed with coming up with what that show would be. And I spent probably more time in London thinking about that show than I did thinking about Tales
Was
from the
that
Crypt.
Perversions of Science?
That ultimately became Perversions of Science. I got shit canned before they started Perversions of Science. Joel decided, for whatever reason, that I was excess baggage, and so for some reason I was asked to leave the party.
So that last season, it's not terrible. It feels more like Hammer House of Horror, and you have people like Ewan McGregor's in an episode. I think Steve Coogan's in an episode, but it just doesn't feel right.
There was a. There was a great advantage to shooting in England because we got to hire actors that HBO would never have paid to fly.
We hired an unknown Daniel Craig.
Yes.
He was in a Tales. But the trouble was, we went over there, we didn't realize that because of the tax situation, that UK writers, directors, and performers didn't want to work in England.
Right.
So I would,
a lot of big ones.
So I remember one day sitting in the office and my assistant says, Roger Moore is on the phone for you. He's calling you back. And I get Roger Moore on the phone. He's going, oh, I love Tales from the Crypt. You guys do such a great job. I live in Switzerland. Why don't you come on over here and we'll make one here? I go, no. We took over Ealing Studios. We're in Ealing, And he goes, I can't work there. It's too expensive. And what's his name? Lewis, the director.
Last name
Lewis Gilbert. Lewis Gilbert.
Lewis Gilbert, who lives in Ealing. I call him up, and he calls me back, and he goes, hello, dear boy. I'd love to come to L.A. and do a Tales. I go, no, we're in your backyard. I'm going to send a car tomorrow, pick you up and bring you over so we can discuss this. And he goes, oh, no. Call me when you get back to L.A. I can't work here. It's too expensive tax-wise.
So that makes sense. And by that time, Showtime had their Outer Limits remake series that I think kind of sucked a little bit of the wind out of Tales from the Crypt, or sort of siphoned off a little bit of that audience. And
I think we had moved on. I think we had moved on to the sci-fi show.
Yeah.
I think we had gone, through the movie. I mean, don't forget when we were actually shooting in London, we were cutting the movie. And so I spent 3 weeks in LA and then 3 weeks in London and 3 weeks in LA and 3 weeks in London until I almost, couldn't walk on a plane.
Right.
And that really was very, very punishing, both to the partnership and to the projects.
When was Big Man on Campus? That was early 90s?
You're thinking of Big Man on Campus, the one about the hunchback at UCLA?
Yeah.
Alan Katz's?
Yes.
The other Alan Katz's movie?
Yes. I imagine you get confused often.
It's funny, we just had the other, finally, during our second season, I reached out to the other Alan Katz. And we had a delightful conversation. What a wonderful, that was so much fun. I'm so glad we got to do that. When I first got to town, and I was doing all those meetings, one of them with Gil, that script, it was originally called The Hunchback of UCLA. And I would go to meetings. I had the script called French Kiss, which was about an arranged marriage. Anyway, so I would walk into the meeting and I go to sit down. They'd say, we really love your script, Hunchback of UCLA. And the first couple of times I was young and stupid, younger and stupider. And I'd say, oh, that's not me. That's the other Katz. And that funny glaze would come over their eyes like, then who the fuck are you? And I said, I wrote a thing called, then they go, did we read that? And so those meetings never went well. So after about the third one, I would go, well, thank you very much. Yeah, well, if you like that one, I think you're going to like this pitch that I'm bringing you today, blah, 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 blah. I got a couple of Alan's residual checks, because Alan had written for MASH and Carol Burnett. He had a career. When I first came to LA, I took a class with the Groundlings. I met Rhonda Shear. The person who taught that class was named Phyllis Katz, and she was Alan Katz's sister. She's one of the founders of the Groundlings School. Wonderful class. Had a great class with Phyllis, who we also got to interview for the podcast. But it was very funny how Alan Katz and that fucking movie of his.
Because I'm trying to do the timeline in my head, and the reason I brought it together was because when you left that...
This was Niagara Falls, my Niagara Falls moment. Slowly I turned, step by step, inch by inch.
And that's why Alan Katz, our Alan Katz, because the Writers Guild demanded he become A.L. Katz. The same name. I always thought in years past, I said, I should have partnered with both of them. It could have been Gil Adler and Alan Katz and Alan Katz.
You go to Alan Katz, no waiting.
And they would have just thought I stuttered.
Because I wondered if so that script was floating around forever, but then he made the movie and he actually played the part of the Hunchback in it, and that started to get some second life traction because it was aired on Comedy Central like nonstop. And when I'm putting the timelines in my head, it was probably around the same time that you got fired from that show. I'm wondering if people were like, "We love you in this Big Man on Campus movie. Now that you're free, why don't you work for us here?"
Nah, when Joel decided he didn't want to negotiate with me anymore, that was when my relationship with Gil ended. This was really the end product of Bordello of Blood. What really the disappointment, everything that had been great about really. We were poised to go one way, and we went the exact opposite way, right down the toilet. And it was rather acrimonious, and it was a hard breakup, and we didn't talk for 25 years.
25 years.
It wasn't until it was one phone call, but really, aside from that, it wasn't until I reached out to Gil. I said, look, I want to tell the story of the making of Bordello of Blood. And I was doing that for my own reasons, just as I was having my own mental health recovery, and as part of my climbing out of the ditch that I was in, one of the stories that I needed to tell was that my own personal Waterloo, but I couldn't tell the story without Gil, and when Gil agreed to be part of it, it suddenly began to grow, and in remembering everything, we also began reconnecting, and then the strangest thing happened, because everything that making Bordello of Blood tore asunder, telling the story of Bordello of Blood's making via the podcast slowly put everything back together again. Right. And when after the first season, because the first 5 episodes is the story of the making, and then the second 5 is other material and just finishing out the rest of the story, we decided to keep going and have a second season. And I said, Gil, be the host with me, and let's tell other people's terrible stories of filmmaking fiascos. But it was our creative relationship rekindling, and suddenly we began talking about other things, and we're just about to take into the marketplace a new series, the first thing that we've taken into the marketplace together for 25 years, called Are You Afraid? It's a streaming horror series, very much in the vein of Tales from the Crypt. It's a regular series with, regular characters, but it captures that sense of wicked fun that the Cryptkeeper brought. You will sense the Cryptkeeper's spirit inside every frame of this thing, and it's about flesh-eating ghouls.
Best things are.
Hey, is there anything funnier than cannibalism in this world?
Not in 2024, I'll tell you.
Well, the interesting part of the whole thing is that when we first started, I didn't want to do the story of telling Bordello of Blood because I found it too painful the first time. I thought it'd be even worse the second time, but really thought maybe I should because, Alan and I were talking. We hadn't done that in a long time. And as we spoke more and more, the whole creative juices and relationship and capability of connecting just came back to us like we hadn't seen each other for 20 hours. And all of a sudden, we started talking about this show, and kaboom, the juices just start hitting again. And, the best thing I think in my career has been this redevelopment of us working together and coming up with a show. Now, if we sell it, it'd be great. But even if we don't sell it, it's okay because it brought back something that, was broken and that I missed desperately, and not really knowing that I missed it as much as I did. What's
the thing people say, like American lives don't have third acts or something like that, or Hollywood stories that have third acts?
F. Scott Fitzgerald said that there are no second lives in American, there are no second acts in American lives. Well, he can go fuck himself.
Proof in action right there.
Yeah, I like to think of myself as a proof that he's just a drunk who doesn't know anything.
Yeah, the F stands for fuck.
That Gil and I are having a second act that's in many ways better than the first.
Is there something that you're like? Were you following each other's careers when you were apart? Did you keep an eye out to see like what the other was working on?
I don't think so.
No,
I don't think so.
That's a tricky question.
I think I was sort of lost in the work that I was doing.
Right.
And it was,
Gil had a great career.
And Warner Brothers really kept me busy back to back to back. In fact, there were a couple of times where I had to just say, I can't, I got to take 2 months. I just got to stop. So I was very busy, doing that.
I mean, let's drop some names. You produced, there was Starsky and Hutch, Superman Returns, Constantine, and then Valkyrie.
Right.
All their tentpole movies. They would send you the scripts. Here are the tentpole movies. Which do you want to do, Gil?
Right. Well, I made a huge mistake after Superman. I came back and I was exhausted, and I got a call from Disney, and they said, we want you to do this thing. Jonathan Mostow is going to direct it, and we have Bruce Willis, and it's called Surrogates. And could you come in tomorrow? And I said, oh, God, I can't. And they said, no, come in. And my agent at the time said, oh, you got to go. So I took the job, but I said to them, I have a problem with the script, and this is the problem. So is anyone going to fix that or not? Because if you're not going to fix it, then I'm really the wrong guy. But if you're going to fix it, so they said, oh, no, we're going to fix it. We agree. Blah, blah, blah. So I went to Boston. We found all the locations, Jonathan Mostow and myself, and we started prepping. And, the weeks started ticking away. And 3 weeks before shooting, I went back to the studio and I said, so no one's talked to me about the fix. No one's talked to me about the change. What's going on? Well, we don't agree with you.
You could have told me that earlier.
Yeah, you should have told me that 10 weeks ago because I'm leaving now.
Nobody wants to go to Boston for no reason. I live here. I know.
And I left the show. I left the show called Surrogates. And Jonathan Mostow went on and made the movie, and they replaced me with some guy that I don't think knew what he was doing terribly. And Jonathan would call me and say, I'm having this kind of a problem with Bruce. What should I do? And I said, I think you should call your producer. and then he would say, I know, but I'm not getting any help from him. And so I would talk to Jonathan a couple of times about how to deal with Bruce and what to say and how to get him to do. And I realized, in part of me was still making that movie.
Right.
And I really loved Jonathan Mostow. I still do. But I had to say to him, Jonathan, I'm not making this movie. I got to walk away.
I mean, that's the problem when you like movies and you love stories. You want to do good things. Yeah. And it makes it really hard to work in Hollywood where that's not always the goal.
Yeah.
Is there anything... Did you guys ever keep mementos from shows? Like when you were talking about Tales from the Crypt, I immediately was like, I would have grabbed those original art from the new mock-up covers. That's what I would have stolen if I worked on the show.
We had a bit of a tradition on Tales from the Crypt. Every script that we did, I would have the cast sign the top sheet with their signature. So I have in a warehouse somewhere in LA locked up all these scripts with names on it. I kept some things from Tales from the Crypt, but also from other things. In Valkyrie, where Stauffenberg has the eye, the false eye, I have the eye and the container that was shown on camera. I kept that.
Don't eat it, or we'll have to cut you open and get the eye out of you.
Exactly. But I have a lot of stuff in a warehouse. I have
that is probably worth a ton. That eye, what you could get on eBay for that eye.
I mean, I have one of the Demon Knights. The big Demon Knights from Demon Knight.
Oh, really? One of the glowing.
Yeah, with the glowing feet and the eyes. I have that one of those in my warehouse. I have a lot of stuff from the shows.
How about you, Alan?
Well, after in the 25 years between our ending and rekindling, I went through a whole other thing. And I was in, I did a couple seasons as a co-executive producer on The Outer Limits, but Bordello of Blood broke me. It set something off in me, and that needed to be fixed. And it took me, I went ultimately into a writer's block and a depression I didn't even know I was in.
Right.
And I needed to bounce, and I got really lucky. And I ended up, I raised 2 kids. I really was out of the business, in essence, for 2 decades, trying to get back in, but really no way. And all my connections to the business were suddenly gone. Because they were a lot of them were connected via Gil, and it's like Gil got all the relationships when it all broke up. And my other problem was I wasn't good at relationships at that particular time. I was really bad at them. I was bad at forging them and bad at keeping them. But that was part of the problem that I had to solve within myself. And when I dealt with all that, which is a whole other story, which
Season
I won't
4.
bore you with now. we touch upon it in the first 5 episodes of the How Not to Make a Movie podcast. Suddenly, I'm a stone cold atheist, but I would tell you I was born again in a life sense. And I suddenly, I rediscovered a passion for storytelling I never had to begin with. And I came out of the gate suddenly with renewed energy. And one of the projects that I did was the How Not to Make a Movie podcast. And suddenly it was this renewed energy, a new connection to the world I never had in the first place. And that's why I say our relationship is better now than it was back in the day. It's more dynamic. It's more happening. Hey, I got lucky in 1,000 different ways, because as I began to try to find my way back into the creative world, this podcasting thing suddenly happened.
Which never would have been a possibility 25 years ago. Like the fact that you can have basically the same technology that $1 million studios have. You're on the virtual shelf distribution wise right next to anything. It's amazing.
It's a level playing field. If you can create content, you can play the same game that everyone else can play. And otherwise, it's completely DIY. There's no fuckhead in a suit telling you, well, I don't know, not my taste. No such assholes exist. Now, there's a lot of work you have to do on your own, but okay, I'll rise to that challenge. And if it's about creating content, well, I'll rise to that challenge too. It's a great environment in which to reinvent. So the podcast was a great way. Part of my problem was I was keeping a secret from myself. And so I thought the least interesting story was mine. And you can't be a good storyteller if you can't tell your own story. You can't. And so once I was able to confess the little secret I was keeping from myself, and I suddenly was able to tell my story, really in complete and total honesty, wow, suddenly I could tell anybody's story. I'm on a storytelling tear.
And what's interesting is you never really understand or know where these things will take you or how they'll take you. I finished Valkyrie, came back, did a screening in Washington, D.C. for the Army and the Marine Corps, and went to an event and met these guys and realized how young they were and how broken they were.
Yeah.
And it put me off on filmmaking totally. And for like 5 years, my wife and I did nothing but raise money for veterans. And during one of the events we raised $1 million in one night at the Playboy Mansion, honoring had comics from Vegas, and Guns N' Roses came and played for the night. We raised $1 million for Operation Mend at UCLA, which is still there. I realized I didn't really want to make movies anymore, television, and I really felt I had wasted my life. Because what was I doing? Telling stories, and these guys are dying and injured, and so I stopped for a while, and only then did I realize how lucky I had been in terms of doing what I'm doing and meeting the people that I met because of what I did. I never would have been in Washington, D.C. had I not made Valkyrie. And I never would have raised this money. And even today, Alan and I continue raising money for veterans through our podcasts. And we do an annual thing, Christmas time, where we raise money for veterans. This is our second year of doing that together. And that'll continue. And so, you never realize how this will affect you, nor the people you meet. I become friends with the king of, it sounds so ridiculous, the king of Jordan and the king of Morocco, are friends. And I met them because of making movies. And, all of a sudden you realize, wow, this has been a pretty blessed event, the whole journey, even though, I was stopped part of the way through. I had kidney cancer and I lost a kidney to cancer, and thought that, wow, that's the end of everything, because I just couldn't think about making movies again.
Sure.
And then, you realize it's just all part of the journey. So I think, coming back with Alan, was rather very special for me that it happened when it happened, and it continues on today.
There is unfinished business between us that we must do. We did not get to finish what we started, and that's really all that we're doing. We've had the opportunity to be in each other's company twice. This has all been virtual, with two exceptions. Gil was in town for a week, but it was very hard to get together toward the end of the pandemic, and we got together at Mike Vosberg's house for an afternoon, and we had lunch. The strange thing was, we didn't have that moment where, having seen each other for the first time in 25 years, where we just kind of, hey man,
feels like no time at all, right?
We hugged, and we picked up right where we left off. We went like right into step walking side by side, chit chat. And then we were together at the Chattanooga Film Festival. They honored us, and so we got to spend the weekend together. It was literally, it felt like we picked up literally where we left off, right down to the grammar.
I mean, as someone who also struggles with all the things that you've discussed here, with no success creatively, the outlook that I have to say is kind of what you just summarized, which is, you can't separate out the good and the bad past experiences, because they all led to what you're doing right now, right? So for better or worse. And so to me, like, once you're able to, be okay with that, then it puts everything sort of in perspective. And it sounds like that's sort of where you guys are at. And interestingly, the thing that I love about horror anthology shows, going back to the Twilight Zone, and for your struggle with, I'm wasted my life making movies, it's the allegory is everything. And those especially make people better people, whether they know it or not. Because it's really hard to do those, make a good story that someone who's not picking up on the allegory enjoys, but also is getting the sort of lesson is a sort of a unique form of storytelling in television, especially, to sort of get those allegories through. So it seems uniquely appropriate here for the story that we've talked about.
Indeed, it is. What's also important about this allegorical story is that it has a happy ending.
Yes. Yes.
It does. And again, it goes back to F. Scott Fitzgerald is wrong.
Yes, he is.
Not only are there second acts, the second acts are significantly better than the first acts, because they're building upon the first act.
You're in the Godfather 2 of life.
Holy cow. Now, let's not make a Godfather 3, please. Let's not do that.
So to wrap up here, is there anything you worked on that you're particularly proud of that you think maybe not enough people saw, or hasn't got enough attention that you'd like people to check out?
In the past, you mean?
Yes. Obviously the new stuff, sure. It's a tough question, I know, because
Children of the Corn 2, I think, has gotten its proper due.
Deadly Harvest, yes.
Let's not go there
let's
either.
see. I I'm always a little disappointed that Haunted Lives, that was unfortunately ahead of the curve. It was a reality show, man. That if we'd done that pilot in the Netflix age, that would have been a series.
Is that something people could see now? Is the pilot available places?
It must be. Tobe Hooper
I think
directed
you can.
it.
Look for it on YouTube.
Okay.
I'm
Haunted
sure
Lives.
you can find it for free on YouTube. I'm pretty certain it's there. I think when I looked for it while we were doing an episode, I think I found it like all of Tales from the Crypt. It's there for free on YouTube.
Yes, absolutely.
Great.
Cool. Well, thank you guys so much. I love so much of the stuff that you guys have done, and I look forward to the stuff you're working on in the future. And the podcast is great. As someone who is a lover of the sort of film school in a box that's like DVD commentaries and that sort of stuff, it all fits in that same world. I like Bordello of Blood, but I like it even more now, sort of with the context and the behind the scenes of what went into it and what I'm seeing.
Oh, we could, if we ever have another conversation, and we should,
Yes.
We could take you backstage day by day on that experience and point to you frame by frame where, all right,
You wanna
that's
kill
this
me, don't
wolf
you?
over
You just wanna
here,
kill me.
that's this bit of psychic pain over here.
Well, that'll be the Rafe Guttman edition of there. Well, thank you guys so much.
You're very welcome. Thanks for having us.
Thank you so much, Ken. It was a real pleasure doing your show, your podcast.
Oh, baby, I see you in my TV set. Yeah, baby, I see you in my TV set. I cut your head off and put it in my TV.
There you go. How great are those guys? Fascinating, honest, funny, and just experienced, and just so much stuff. I love that. I love those kind of chats, and I know you did too. Do not miss their show. Subscribe to it. Go listen to it right now. And but stop next week when I have a brand new episode of this show and listen to that. But in the meantime, you can listen to their show and catch up. But I'll see you again next time for a brand new edition of TV Guidance Counselor. Rafe Gustinson? Is that Dennis Miller's name in it? Something like that?
Was it
Guttman.
Rafe
Guttman.
Rafe Guttman. That's right. Yeah.